have made some adjustments to the agenda this morning. The first is I'm moving to the start of the agenda, vaccine passport ban resolution draft. Commissioner Shull asked for this item. There was a draft in your packet. Commissioner Shull, would you like to kick it off, please?
Yes, thank you and good morning. In response to constituents' concerns about the potential for a vaccine passport, last week I put together a draft. That's a rough draft for consideration, for transparency, to get people to consider what a vaccine passport would do. Now, in that draft, which was, again, intended to stimulate discussion in the county about the potential for a vaccine passport, the mention in there about Jim Crow laws. During Reconstruction, after the Civil War, after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed, some states in the South came up with laws that restricted civil liberties based on one's race. And a vaccine passport, if passed and implemented, would restrict civil liberties based on your medical record. And my constituents who compelled me to put together a draft to stimulate conversation in the county are concerned about the potential of having civil liberties restricted for some people who choose not to get vaccinated. Now, for the last year, we have been working hard to achieve herd immunity through vaccinations or exposure to COVID and the resulting antibodies. Now there's some word from Salem that instead of just working towards herd immunity, that a COVID passport might be implemented. And there's a 1996 law, federal law, the HIPAA law, which restricts any entity to demand your medical record. That's private. And so the draft was intended to bring attention to this potential problem, and that's it. It is not a draft that I'm asking the board to consider for adoption. That's what I have to say on that area.
Anything else you'd like to say, Commissioner Shull?
I think that covers it.
Not at this time. I see somebody's in the queue. Is that Commissioner Fisher?
Chair Smith, if you wanted to make any comments before moving in the queue.
I am going to make some comments, but you know, I just assume back cleanup. I would like you to continue with anything you've got to say.
I find this comparison to Jim Crow laws absolutely reprehensible. Oh, sorry. I want to be very clear. I don't believe it is the perspective of Clackamas County or this commission as a whole to support such insensitive and volatile comparisons and comments, and it is deeply disturbing. So that's, I just needed to share
Are you
that.
finished?
Thank you, Chair
Okay,
Smith.
yeah, thank you. Commissioner Schrader?
Well said, Commissioner Fisher. I do find this very deeply disturbing, and it makes me very sad that that kind of comparison has been made with what we are trying to do in the middle of a pandemic in terms of public health safety, and somehow comparing it to the institutionalization of, racism essentially in our country. I don't think there is a comparison. I think they are qualitatively different issues. I'm very upset by this, as you are, and I cannot support this.
Commissioner Shull?
Yes. The reference to Jim Crow laws has nothing to do with racism. It has to do with the restriction of civil liberties based on a law from a state. That is all. And anyone who has family going back to pre-1964 in the Civil Rights Act will tell you, especially if they lived in the South, that the restriction of civil rights is a cruel thing, and once implemented, it doesn't go away very soon. Jim Crow laws started right after about 1877 during Reconstruction, and they lasted for 87 years. That's my reference. When you pass a law that restricts civil liberties, they don't go away anytime soon. And civil liberties, in this case, has nothing to do with racism because it would affect all races the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shull and Commissioners. I'm going to speak on this issue now. It is incumbent upon the elected county commissioners, as we are the leaders of all people in Clackamas County. And all through what we've been through the last year, we should understand that the use of certain terms and words have an emotional connotation to them. This resolution, unfortunately, came through without being vetted by staff, administrator, county council, or even myself, because I have allowed for a very liberal policy that giving equal say to any of my commissioners who want an item discussed, then they can put it on the issues list. And I will continue with that policy, except I will say this. All commissioners, including myself, have the responsibility to vet writings with staff ahead of time. Today, we are going to discuss and hopefully pass a history resolution acknowledging that history is an important tourism component. I have been working on that language for months. I've had 16 set of eyes look at that document before I brought it to prime time. And even when I did, my commissioners had additions, which I made allowances. That is what, as chair, I expect the work of every single one of my county commissioners to do. You don't just throw something, you don't throw gasoline on fire and then expect to retract statements. Mark Shull, you have been through so much. And at times, my heart has bled for you. I have given you allowances, I have supported you, and you should know better. I find this resolution as originally submitted abhorrent and irresponsible. And I do not believe that the references to Jim Crow, regardless of history, support the greatest good for Clackamas County. Now, rightfully so, I agree that passports are not the way to go, and I do not think vaccines should be mandatory. It is still a choice. And I will fight for that right as long as I'm here. But I will not tolerate from anybody, including you, sir, the language of this resolution. It will not proceed today. It is dead. And unfortunately, you have irreparably harmed any further action that this board can possibly take on reference to passports. Now, there's probably a good percentage of our citizens who would agree that vaccine passports are not what American citizens should be doing, and I agree with that as well, because it's still a choice. But this resolution today will not proceed, and I believe I have the votes to do that. I am also ready to take some action, but I see a couple lights on. Paul, you're up.
Yeah, I just want to say I had a hard time with this. I concur with my colleagues' concerns. Unfortunately, we can't strike this from the record. It's a public record. That resolution, regardless how it was intended to be used, will remain a public record. And any kind of conversation in the future about passports is somewhat going to be compromised by this commission to even discuss it because of the particular language and the resolution in place. That said, I don't think the passport is something that a local government should do in the first place. I think this is something that's done at the federal level right now and the state level, and something that we can't really, really frankly, influence, in my opinion. That's my humble opinion. There are resources here at the county. We have, if there's a legal argument and the context was passports, we have Mr. Madcore and his team of staff that could have assisted, Mr. Shull yesterday, well, not yesterday, but in weeks past or going forward. We have staff, we have advisement, we have a number of resources here and talent here at the county to help advise a conversation about passports. And going into case law, I think you can be selective about that, but again, this is not the place. So I find it very unfortunate we're here today with this particular situation of bringing something with tremendous racist overtones that at a time following a weekend, a memorial, it's just the timing couldn't be worse, in my opinion. That's all I have to say.
Commissioner Shull.
This was a draft document to stimulate discussion, and that's what it's done. There's nothing in there that should be construed as coming from a racist perspective. In fact, I would submit that the people in this county of color, would be the most against civil restriction based by a passport, and that they will understand what I'm referring to when I refer to those Southern laws that restricted civil liberties after Reconstruction. This was intended to stimulate discussion as per the overwhelming interest from my constituents who do not want to see a COVID passport. Thank you.
Have you finished?
Yes.
Well, Commissioner Shull, you're getting your wish, because this sure has stimulated concern right across America, and you will answer to this, and you will answer alone to this. I'm prepared to make a motion. I'm going to move that Commissioner Shull be stripped of all liaison committee assignments where BCC influence is assumed.
I'll second that.
Motion has been made to strip Commissioner Shull by me, seconded by Martha Schrader. Any further discussion?
Yes, I would just like to say I take no pleasure in this at all. This is very sad. It's very upsetting. I'm trying not to, this is not a personal thing, but I see no other recourse. And I am very sorry it has come to this, but I just don't see any other way right now. And I would be glad to talk to our fellow commissioner privately. I don't like doing these kinds of things publicly to one another. I've always kind of held that as a standard for myself, and I feel like this is also a violation of how I also want to treat people, but I honestly see no other recourse right now.
Commissioner Shull.
Yes, I encourage everyone in this county to read the draft resolution. And I also would like to ask the board how my liaison to the Fair and Rodeo Board, the Parks Board, or anything else like that can be possibly affected by my intent to put out to the county this issue to make sure it got some attention. I see no reason why this board would restrict me from my liaison duties, period, end of sentence.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Shull, You and I have talked privately, we have talked openly about many of the issues that have plagued you since the beginning in January. I'm sorry you do not understand. I'm sorry you do not understand the effect that words have on people. Words mean substance. I have given you great latitude, as I would to any of my commissioners. By the way, I've given you extreme grace. I've tried to counsel, as many people have tried to counsel. But in all good measure, I cannot allow you to go out into the community where our boards and other commissions with a loose tongue. Sonia Fisher, are you up?
Yeah, Chair Smith, you said it very well. My thoughts exactly. I am sure that there are some people who would defer to the expertise of Mark Shull, who has demonstrated himself as racist and bigoted. And you know what? There is a fine line between ignorance and hatred. And it's a blurry line. And I am just so concerned about the confidence that Mr. Shull has in making such blatantly offensive statements. And I urge you, Commissioner Shull, to work harder to constrain the bigotry that comes out of your mouth. It cannot represent Clackamas County. And so with that, I will be supporting Chair Smith's motion to strip you of your liaison duties.
Thank you. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I too find no pleasure in this whatsoever, but Commissioner Shull, as a colleague, I'll just say that being aware of sensitivities, the environment, the times in which we live in today, what we say and what we bring up in conversations has to be really thought through. And sometimes these things maybe, are, have constructive intent, but however, whether or not that's in play here is hard to know, but I think we just have to realize that decades and decades of people have been hurt and have been marginalized. And there are certain things that you don't bring up in certain conversations because of those people that have been impacted. And in Clackamas County, we are an open county to everyone. And there are people in this county and in this region that would take those kinds of comments to heart personally. I mean, and not when I say heart, I mean, it would impact them in a negative way. That's the world we live in. And I can't respond to your question as far as the Fair Board, as far as assignments, but I can say that, think through, use our staff, get advice. Similar counsel I have shared with you in the past is seek advice, learn, talk to those populations, those people. It's hard to empathize, this mask, hard to empathize with other people if you haven't lived in that kind of an experience or that kind of world or that kind of situation. But I think talking to those folks or listening to stories or reading can tell you more or learn more from this. But I hope this is a learned experience. But in light of the, in light of having that document in our record, which I struggle with, I just find it extremely troubling. how it will be perceived and how this county will be perceived when we're trying to work our way out and demonstrate as our core values that we are a county, we recognize equity, diversity, inclusion, and that's that particular topic or that particular citing in history is something that is not a topic that one would bring up.
Commissioner Shull.
Yes. For the citizens of Clackamas County that are hearing this today, we must not be afraid to refer to mistakes in the nation's history in the past. I refer to the Jim Crow laws as a mistake because they restricted civil liberty based on race. I would ask the people of the county who are hearing these proceedings today to consider what partisan motivation might have come from some of my constituents. Second, read the draft, and you will find it is devoid of bigotry and racism. Thirdly, I referred to those laws of the southern states during Reconstruction because they are a good example of what I want to avoid in this county, and that by referring to them, we are reminded of history and can learn from history. That's why I put it in there. I didn't come here today to mince my words. I came here to do what I think is my job and respond to my constituents. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Fisher.
Chair Smith, I'm very concerned about the perception of Clackamas County. I agree with Commissioner Savas that this is a tremendous stain on our reputation. I am not quite sure what to do about that. I want to lean on my fellow commissioners to see what other actions. It's obvious that Commissioner Shull does not understand that comparing a requirement to wear a mask if you are unvaccinated to the destruction and devastation that the Jim Crow laws, what occurred, people could not attend certain places. It led to arrests if you used a water fountain that wasn't designated. It led to lynchings. It led to death. Making that comparison is incredibly painful, not only for communities of color, but for our entire community. And the inability to see that, Chair Smith, maybe we need to be stronger. Maybe we need to ask for an additional censure to the original censure where we asked Mr. Shull to resign, because this is truly unacceptable that Mr. Shull continues to dig in his heels and justify these statements.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. We have one motion on the table for right now. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, and just further thinking, Commissioner Shull, I just would have probably advised that that maybe one should just reference the Constitution of the United States and those protections that it provides, and use that as a defense. I think that would have been a wiser move in absence of counsel or other advice. That I probably would have suggested something like that. There's a lot of protections in our country, and I think, justifiably, people say, "Well, what's that done for us over all these, these hundreds of years?" And I think it's done quite a bit, but is it perfect? No. And I think that's why we have legal representation. I think we're in a unique time and place in this country like no other time that I've experienced. And this is, first and foremost, up front and center, and the most sensitive times of all, that we need to recognize that everyone is equal, and how that is applied in a state of emergency because of COVID and the laws. That is a tough one to navigate, but that's not a place for a local government to be. That is a setting or a venue that is a higher level of government than us. I appreciate the willingness to have that conversation, but you know, I think educating ourselves as to the passport, where this is going, will be determined again by a higher office than the county.
Chair, can I call for the question?
Commissioner Scholl's in the
Oh, I'm sorry.
queue?
Okay,
Is
then
that
I'll call for the question after Commissioner Shull.
And then I have one statement.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Yes, I agree that I could have referenced the Constitution of the United States. But in 1877, there was a Constitution of the United States. There was also 3 new amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. The restriction on civil liberties in the southern states happened despite those things. And it's the concern of some of my constituents that Salem could do the same thing to us. That's what this draft is about. Again, it is devoid of bigotry and racism. It was intended to cause transparency and discussion. That's what I'm here for. I represent the people who elected me, and that's what I'm going to do, irregardless of what the other board members say. I will not be censored. I will say what I feel, and I will do what I think. Thank you.
I'm going to finish this up before Commissioner Schrader calls for the question. The huge irony of this whole debate is I believe there is support in Clackamas County for not having a vaccine passport. I don't think any of us want to have to show our papers. That has historical connotations that are frightful, in my opinion. However, because of the damage of the language in this particular amendment, I'm not sure we're going to be able to revisit that. Although every commissioner does have their personal opinion, they can state that. I think this is a storm that we're going to have to weather. It's just been a horrid time, and I want to reiterate again as leaders, mark our words carefully. Commissioner Schrader.
So I'd like to call for the question. Call for the vote, please.
Christine, please call the poll.
Okay, Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Commissioner Shull?
No.
Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 4-1. And what that means is when you do not have a liaison duties, it means that you do not represent the Board of County Commissioners in your dealings. Thank you very much. Gary, what's up next?